Hi, welcome everyone. I guess we can start. Thank you for coming. I'll just briefly introduce the speaker. Sofia Villena Araya is going to be giving a talk today, and she's a Costa Rican artist, researcher, and curator based in London currently. I'll just do it. She's working on a project with Mart and a curatorial collaboration, bringing performance artists and creative writers together, and which is going to be presented in March in London, and also a commission by the Museum of Contemporary Art and Design in Costa Rica to develop a research-based artistic installation at the museum in June 2019. She's a part of the curatorial collective called Topsoil, which is integrated by Amelie Widdle and me. She has an MA degree in Goldsmiths, University of London, and Contemporary Art Theory. So I'll just leave it to her. And thank you for
Hi everybody, thank you for being here. Sorry for the formality of me reading, but I hope the images make it a bit more lively. And thank you, Denise, for your invitation. So I have a little index, so we know how it's gonna go. The talk is gonna last, it's gonna take 40 minutes. And in the first part, I'm just gonna really talk about the exhibition that is curated. And in the second part, I'm just gonna jump more fully onto my research, and it's divided onto 4 sections. Part 1. In the context of my dear friends. Similar to the function of a canal, my dear friends allows us to connect places, beings, ideas, and practices that may feel distant from one another, however, retraining that proximity more ethically. My dear friends approaches the 105th anniversary of the Suez Canal by asking itself how the colonial past of the canal continues to affect different contemporary relations. However, as Papadopoulos suggests, the relations that it presents are not the obvious ones, but the pieces shown work on different scales and mediums that most commonly than not will be presented in separate settings. This motivates us to question the distance we place between the subjects and ways of seeing presented in here. An intriguing decision in this exhibition is that it creates a common ground for photojournalistic work with work that layers, without making distinction, photographs of different kinds with archival imagery. To me, this decision distances both methods' relation to any notion of truth and rather highlights how both artists choose such techniques based on common drive to communicate and intimately approach the issue. And it is on this basis of intimacy that the exhibition suggests us we might be able to retrace a different geography of connectivity from the colonial one. The title of this exhibition makes this proposal even more compelling. The title, My Dear Friends, addresses its participants, the public included, all for his tonight, as dear friends, and to think of participation in this exhibition as a friendship, a special level of vulnerability is asked from us. This is an acknowledgement of an already existing proximity between us and a willingness to care for that closeness. So with this precise premise that the curator, Denise Kirkali, has given us, I am going to introduce my topic now. The Darien Isthmus. So nonetheless of its proximity and its regional and global historical weight, I didn't come across this place really until I started my master's. So although I have been living away since I turned 16, I'm originally from Costa Rica. To have a sense of its geography, Costa Rica is in Central America and is between Nicaragua and Panama. It would take approximately 18 hours to drive from San Jose, the capital where I'm from, to the Darien Isthmus. The Darien Isthmus is between present-day Panama and Colombia, It articulates South, Central, and North America as one continent, and splits the Pacific and the Atlantic up as two separate oceans. Before starting my research, I first thought of doing a kind of ethnography. However, soon enough, the possibility to go to this place was not available at the moment, and that pushed me to rethink the whole project. So still today, I have never been here, and this fact has very much shaped the most important questions to me. First, what processes have shaped the multiple distances I feel to this place? And second, what is to try to approach this place by using those distances as kind of materials? So in exploring these questions, what I turned to was the internet. So I looked to online archives, Facebook pages, blogs, online news, YouTube videos, and others. So what I'm presenting today is a small selection of this material. This project, more specifically, emerged from a master's dissertation. So I did my master's in the UK, and that will be like 3 to 4 months research period. And while researching, an incredible variety of sources came up. And I was quite overwhelmed because although they had a relation to this place, there were many gaps between this information, and I felt like I had little resources and time to fill those gaps. The place really came across to me as a point of entanglement between many different spaces, times, and ways of knowing and speaking. It felt as if I had set up myself to too big of a research topic, but because of the practicalities of putting the material together, rather than shifting topics, I became more concerned with what could I do with this seemingly incomparable material. So I asked myself, in which grounds could this material exist together in dialogue? And how could this process of putting this disparate material together be itself a way of critically speaking about different understandings of history and research within academic circles and higher education? So in the process, I found refuge in certain thinkers and methods. First, to think of this research as a kind of aesthetic feeling of the place was helpful. Second, I was particularly intrigued about how the use of poetics could allow me to experiment with how to put materials together. And lastly, I was interested in notions of history that consciously distance themselves from exactitude and authenticity. And an important figure here was the anthropologist Michel Taussy, who has defined context, quote, as the encompassing of incongruent times and the juxtaposition of such far away contrasting spaces, end quote. So one of my interests has been precisely to think through these incongruencies in historical narratives. An image often coming into mind were those cartoon scenes where the reparation of one wooden board in a fence results in the fall of another board, and it disinvolves into this endless cycle where reparation and disperse. So I asked myself how historical gaps could be thought not as calls for amendments, but as opportunities to further take apart the remaining surface of hegemonic narratives. Part 1. The road to progress, moving with disorientation. A history of imperialism in the Central American Isthmus has rarely concerned the use of its material territory to carve way to new geographies. These hegemonic geographies have been established through the imposition of practices of mobility and route tracing using canals, railways, roads, and others. The Darien Isthmus, a multi-ethnic region with different forms of living engaged in various degrees of mobility, is particularly relevant to this history. Presently, the Darien is best known as the region where the Darien Gap is. So here we have a simple image. That is the only missing part of the Pan-American system of highways. Well known as a gap in English, as we know it in Spanish, is the Darien block. The notion of gap can denote an absence or an emptiness. It can be a negative space, but also an opening, an intermission, or a breather. The gap is something filled from the inside or from the outside. The plug goes in hand with a gap, or more precisely, a hole. It is a concentration of material that has a resisting and obstructing capacity and can allow or prevent flows. A block can be deliberately used to fill a gap, but it can also be perceived as a malfunctioning. A plug almost always needs force or pressure to come out. It can come out with speed, like a champagne cork, yet it can also be diluted, like was plugging an ear, or it can also come out in a controlled manner with external assistance, like one pulls a pass plug out. Although the Darianismus has been negatively described down the centuries as one of wilderness, remoteness, and danger, while researching, I continue wondering why tuning into this place was like navigating through bewilderment. This sense of confusion to me had a lot to do with the layered complexity of the place and its history. However, differently, I sought to think of this bewilderment in terms of research methods. This is specifically relevant because doubt has been an affect which has strongly shaped colonial as well as decolonial imaginations of Central America. The doubtful strait was a colonial designation which emerged from the belief in a supposed natural canal in the isthmus, and in recent times, this idea of a doubtful territory has been mobilized by poets, curators, and others as a way of doubting back this precise colonial gaze. Researcher Rosalena Fisek expresses how the Darien historically has been used to think of what can lay beyond the edges of the map. And here I would add beyond the spectrum of visibility, knowledge, and imagination of an imperialist expansion. For this first section, I explore how doubt can be a way of reclaiming the poetic potential of this place for the colonial imagination. Still today, the Darianismus is presented as indecipherable and is gapped as a stubborn break in the Pan-American system of highways, initiated more than 40 years ago. Looking at the much earlier initiatives to build a canal there, as well as the later highway construction efforts, it seems that such projects will always face forces undoing the push for finalization. The many offsets in the opening of pathways along this territory might give an atmosphere of stagnation. It sounds like the story of the lengthy construction of a monumental road to progress. A construction perpetually paused by mysterious bureaucratic procedures and last-minute assessment of cryptic information. Time passes and people continue to hear about the unconcluded road. The story is getting old, so are the people, and the long wait continues for the day they will be able to use the road. It has been so long, and now they are tired and forgetful. The day of the funeral has come. The hearers is here to carry their dead bodies down the road to the cemetery. This is the road that they use every day in wait of the new one. By the side of this road, there is a signboard. It reads, "The Road to Progress." In this story, the road, inscribed with the predetermined meaning of advancement, obscures the broader logics involved in highway construction. So in this case, it calls advancement a growth that could really be more like a shattering movement compulsively destroying everything. While we are distracted, waiting for this advancement, other forms of expropriation sneak in, so that its supposed impenetrable space then comes to serve as an obscure landscape where systemic forces, constantly mutating their appearance, want to filter through. Previous understandings of this place as a refusal, a landscape which defied Western colonialist comprehension, dragging to the present discussions, questioning communication structures, naturalized within a modern structuring of space and relations, as another kind of colonization. However, its own state of wilderness gets deciphered as a tool for domination. So the clearest example of this is the U.S. Department of Transportation's postponing of highway funding in 1977, quote, depending upon the establishing of successful control on foot and mouth disease in Colombia, end quote. So this is an intentional gapping that assigned an infrastructural role to this dense stretch of jungle. Asking whether to reanimate construction efforts, this stretch of jungle that gaps the road itself no longer poses any resistance. It is as if the Darien is affected by a rare virus that multiplies in the blinking of an eye. This virus is carried around, contained within all colonizing traumas, illegal substances, rebels, multinational corporations, supposed place indigenous people, $1 million organized human trafficking industry, and, quote, creating narcos with a lot of time on their hands, quote. In more recent times, immigrants from countries such as Haiti, Cuba, Yemen, Bangladesh, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Somalia have been depicted as virulent threats as well. The gap can retain these very pressures, acquiring unimaginable proportions, like a boiling pot about to spill all over. At play within the finalization of the road are questions of identity, culture, collaboration, integration, belonging, futurity, and others put under the wing of economic growth and expansion. What needs to move, how and through where in approximating economic futures, who is allowed to jump aboard the right to progress, and furthermore, who is the driver. Therefore, the finalization process of this road and its open gap have had to do with a regulation, impediment, filtering, fragmentation, and concealing of perceived hellish flows of diverse, feared and denied orders. The Darien has an inferno right at the center of the earth. Focusing in the construction of the Pan American Highway, researcher Rosalena Fisek tells that initial construction efforts neglected this place, considered by nation-states as lacking relevance. However, complicating potential dualisms, Fisek also highlights ways in which roads within this major system have also served for alternative connections. Nonetheless, in coming back specifically to the Darien, Fisek proceeds, quote, "The irony was that precisely because on account of its narrowness, the Darien is the only place where the highway must go through," end quote. The Darien leaves no other possibilities but that whatever crosses this latitude by land has to inevitably pass through it. While it was a door that opened up possibilities of a global economy, it is also a reminder that all the demons created in carving its geographies cannot be fully contained. In the thick of this complex landscape, how can we rephrase the relationship between the gap, this fragmented landscape, and the search for futures? So my essay has attempted to work at the level of images. For this reason, I turned to Agamben and Osigmanderstand because I think the picturing of one's lifetime or shared history as the vertebrae of a monster and its fracture as where the critical relation towards history lies is an useful image here. I wonder how the Darien gap can be visualized as this broken bone of history. So in the first half of the narrative I just presented, I spoke about a time of no time, an atmosphere wherein we cannot discern. In distancing myself from this notion of time, the broken bone of history, the space of criticality, points at a capacity to identify and problematize conventions or reasoning deeply naturalized within an era. In Agamben's terms, contemporariness is a relationship with time that adheres to it through a disjunction and anachronism. I take on Agamben's proposal of the contemporary in precisely reflecting on how, although right at the center of the world and history, the Darien is cast as remote. I ask, how can this place of supposed backwardness be at once a gap within the era's hegemony and a theoretical space whence to discuss different forms of dispossession and division? So to think the contemporary with the Darien, this place implies to me two things. Firstly, there is a performativity in grounding a sense of contemporaneity in a place that, although so central in history, is still characterized as far away spatially and temporally. Secondly, I position this thinking within contemporary debates about the global. Part 2. In the first frame of a video, a floating mappamundi focuses on North American territories. Blurrily depicted, these masses of land composed by overlapping shades of military green start to disintegrate, coming into view as a pixelated flat surface. This surface becomes secondary as colorful bright lines are superimposed all over this mass. The territory is visible as a dense network. The sphere of the world smoothly tilts downwards, with the Bering Strait center frame. Like electrical sparks, a thick yellow line that passes from the very top of America's northern hemisphere passes through the Bering Strait, and then more and more bipolar lines shoot across, activating the rest of the world's northern hemisphere. This hyper-network view of the northern hemisphere quickly scans to a deserted southern hemisphere entirely of washed military green. This frame, in which the Darien Gap is right at the center, continues to show a densely connected north while the south remains completely networkless. A map with primary colors pops up a couple of frames after. A thick red line traverses north to south, dividing the territory in two. The image loses color, becoming matte gray, once imagined as the place between two silver bodies of water. The waters where the sun used to sink in as a gold doublon are now petrified. The edges of the continent fade, merging with the shininess waters. Solely discernible is the thick, long line with its break in the center, the Darien Gap. So many of the cartographic imagery, historic as well as contemporary, of the Darien that I found, concern a space layer and organized by lines. I have been therefore reflecting on what are the common effects of those lines in the imagination of the globe and the Darien within global scales. The most useful term to think through the effects of these lines were networks. Networks have been essential tools for effectively reimagining, reorganizing, occupying, and using space in regards to global scales. Three of the functions of networks that I thought as particularly pertinent to the Darien were, number one, networks as physical structures imposed on a space. Number two, visualizing tools, so as metaphors applied to something that is not strictly set up as network. And three, which is linked to this previous one, which is a way of understanding and explaining the world. Diminishing the perceived interfering noise from the landscape, networks make for the territorialized communication that annuls physical distance. Like a blanket that masks underlying bodies, but also emphasizes them through its reduction. The form is flattened, while the conditions has changed. Perforating the blanket all over from scattered points are long threads combining as fewer but far more intense tangles. Sometimes these tangles are so dense that we can't even feel the blanket anymore, even less the bodies underneath. This connectivity installs a loss of tactility. So I'm interested in how networks, although they can diagram links, this diagramming also implies an isolation. So if we pay attention to this map, it was drawn by George Philip in 1905, titled The North Atlantic Ocean, and was published in a mercantile marine atlas. While the continents frame the margins of the map, tense strings across the ocean stand out, foregrounding its waters as the main arena and the markers of a transcontinental scale. Different types of lines and more concentrated symbols emphasize space in terms of mobility and communication. From Europe into Africa, lines launch all across the North Atlantic Ocean, as red lines reach into the Caribbean, poking the edges of the island so that their original shape becomes indistinguishable. Here, I want to recall the video of Nicaraguan contemporary artist Raul Quintanilla of a honey silhouette of Nicaraguan revolutionary Sandino getting eaten by an army of ants. We can similarly picture this scene as a bunch of red ants devouring the island's sweetness, leaving them shapeless. Only visible are their devouring ants. So these hungry ants continue their thunder journey to America, leaving a red trail around the edges of the Central American territories. The retracing of both coastal edges, the Caribbean and the Pacific, come together are where the Panama Canal is being built. From here, rather than continuously to closely retrace the edges of the rest of the territorial's geometry, the outlining on both sides reaches South America with open angles. the plain yellow southern part of Panama is redrawn as negative space. Although a century apart, this map can recall the first video of the tilting mapamundi earlier described, when all those colorful lines in these two web maps prevent us from seeing what was underneath, such as in the east coast of the United States, or in the first case, or in the Caribbean islands in the second. The Darien pale undertone might come as surprising, particularly within the Central American territories, one that although appeared as a potential strait to Western eyes, its thickness is agitating compared to networks' scrawny lines. On the one hand, with the way the network bypasses territories, the Darien is delegated to that ignored space within the nodes and edges previously mentioned. On the other hand, the slim structuring of networks seem to be undermined while simultaneously emphasizing the way the isthmus of Central America draws itself as a wide and deadly line. Now zooming into the space of transit, I want us to pay attention to this map which researcher Julie Velasquez presents in an article. It is a geographical plan for the French construction of the canal in the Darien dating from 1860. The main difference that interests me with this map is that it zoomed in, emphasizing the Darien Isthmus and the oceans next to it. This zoom in draws our attention to how movement has specifically been envisioned in wanting to traverse the isthmus. This map shows the landscape as uninhabited, undulating, and pronouncedly uneven. Contrasting this protuberant terrain with bumpy mountains, the canal, as with a Cartesian vision of space, easily cuts through the landscape accidents, a fluid movement through the territory. While the territory is depicted horizontally, the canal foregrounds a verticality. Though the land is bulky, the ocean is fully tranquil. Here, 6 traveling ships approach the canal from southwest to northeast. Moving with the ships, the eyes of the viewer also enters the picture from below. This upward motion is emphasized by the map's cropping, closely framing the Darien's extensive Pacific opening. The viewer continues this upward movement straight through the Isthmus Canal without coming across any distraction. Waiting for them at the top is a clear and expansive horizon. So a relation between mobility, autonomy, and immutability is really important in order to grasp some of the processes that have isolated the isthmus. Marcos Guevara grounds this kind of reflection specifically in relation to Central America and its historical perception as isthmus in contrast to as bridge. So what Guevara says is that understanding the isthmus as bridge implies a use of the territory as contiguous. Rather differently, to understand it as isthmus, recalling the doubtful strait, is to see the territory as disjointed in order for others, usually from outside the region, to make their way through. Although both terms address the functionality of the territory in regards to movement and connection, its understanding as bridge highlights a use of its physical broadness. Contrastingly, its understanding as strait ignores the density of activity that can emerge and intensify on what, to the network perspective, seems to be insubstantial. Guevara comments on the concept of strait. Quote, "The search for straits, transismic projects from the conquest frame the foreign interest in the region, breaking the traversal communications that were forged since ancient times, establishing global dynamics that, paradoxically, isolated the Tehuantepec peoples up to Panama." End quote. Behind this networking, there has been a practice of profiting from an environment while delegating to it an exterior role, a marginalization of interactions, practices, and labors that keep connections and flows going. So differently to the adjacent bordering of the nation-state, the bordering of networks concerns more of a skeletal simplification of space. This sense of exteriority works on multiple levels. Guevara, for instance, analyzes a cultural, spatial, political, and historical reordering involved in the later maintenance of past according to competing notions of movement and communication. Guevara states that, quote, with the competing eagerness to guarantee access to possible canal routes and to control the region in securitizing the open canals, spaces are invaded, fomenting dictatorships, dependencies, and processes of independence, the tracing of frontiers, and the securing of fragmented alliances. Part 3. So the departing point for this last part is an often cited quote by William Patterson. William Patterson was a Scotch-born merchant who proposed the foundation of a trading colony in the Darien around 1696 to the Company of Scotland. It was a really ambitious but completely failed plan, and it was known as the Darien Scheme. So raising speculations about taking possession of the Darien as a route to the Pacific, Patterson referred to it as, quote, the door of disease, the key to the universe. One of the objects that the National Museum of Scotland uses to narrate this history is the Darien chest. This is, as we can see, this is a bulky iron chest dating from 1665. For exhibition purposes, it nowadays remains open. The inner side of the chest lid has a sophisticated locking mechanism composed of many iron levers, appearing like a maze. Imagine it moving, one can see a domino movement. Beyond its heaviness, this intricate locking device challenges physical strength. It appears that no physical force possibly imagined could open this chest. Although empty, this chest's dimensions, firmness, and elaborate structure speaks of something abundant. This can allow us for speculation over the relevance of what was supposed to be in it. The museum's online fact file informs the viewer on how the chest is representative of a precarious time for the kingdoms of the Scots, and the many deaths that resulted from the failed attempt to colonize the Darien. The considerable debilitation resulting from their intent to colonize the Darien has been cited as one of the fundamental reasons for the kingdoms of the Scots to accept the 1707 Act of Union with the British. The hollowness of this chest makes tangible this history of defeat. While declared as a failed plan within Scottish history, the Darien continues to cast a shadow onto the empire. This map, dating from 1733, was drawn by English cartographer Henry Poppel and has the title of A Map of the British Empire in America. Tellingly, it illustrates this presence of the British Empire in America with a naval battle scene. The note in the archive describes it as a dramatic battle shown north of Colombia. Its cropping of the continent extends from Nicaragua to Colombia, diagonally dividing the frame in two. In the already described map of the French plans for canalization, this is depicted as tranquil and the sky as cloudless. This time, however, as the battle distorts the serene horizon of the Caribbean Sea. The Darien imposes itself amidst the oceans, confronting the viewer right in the middle of the battle scene. As the center of the universe, the Darien oversees maritime activity. Empires move in darkness as the door of disease remains locked for them. So what did it mean for the so-called age of exploration that there was a place that could actually be thought as the door of disease? So during this age, from the early 15th until the end of the 18th century, innovations in navigation opened up possibilities for economic development in Europe based on faster ways of moving and communicating in an expanding world. A ruling of worlds from a distance that was made possible with the sea as its medium and mercantile system as its form of political economy, dominating in Western Europe at a time when a Western global consciousness was materializing. Key to this materialization was the discovery of the last sea, now known as the Pacific Ocean, in 1513. One of the most famous narrations of this discovery are in this book, The 60 Moments of History, which compiles 12 key moments in Western history. In a trip to the New World, a dog mysteriously appears on board. No one on the ship knows to whom this dog belongs, but he's getting on everyone's nerves as he desperately keeps on barking. Suddenly the dog goes completely quiet and starts sniffing around a chest. At this point, all eyes are on the chest. With the suspense of such focus, it inexplicably opens by itself. A man steps out, and that's the infamous colonizer Vasco Núñez de Balboa. Already considered a rebel, once he's in the New World, Balboa usurps the power from the colony of Darien from El Ciso, which was another colonizer. This was, of course, of great offense from the king, and sooner or later, Balboa was going to be condemned for a trial. Threatened with the crown's punishment, Balboa knew that only a great discovery this time could justify his acts. A great discovery was a redemptory discovery. The author stressed it was a form of immortality. As it would take considerable time for Spanish officials to arrive in America, Balboa formulates a plan. He was going to be the first one to see the Southern Sea and take possession of it. The author narrates Balboa's search for the sea as a struggling movement. Many of his companions are left behind, ill or dead in the jungle. However, even if it implies a lack of shade and excess of heat, Balboa is determined to continue. Balboa's first goal was to get to the top of the mountains where he could observe the Caribbean and the Pacific simultaneously. The value of this view could be compared to the panopticon which Foucault speaks about, or Jorge Luis Borges with the Aleph. This is the idea of a place within a larger space where to stand there also means you are standing everywhere at once. In contrast to Balboa's climb, in Borges' story of the Aleph, he has to go down the cellar under the dining room of a man called Carlos Angeltino in order to find his view. This descent to the basement, although less of an exotic landscape, clearly seems for Borges just as threatening and strange of a journey. Once in the basement, Argentino gives Borges some instructions. Borges has to lay down on the floor, focus his gaze on the steps, count till the 19th step, and wait for the Aleph to appear. Balboa also carries on with his strenuous journey, making his way up to the southern mountains. At the top, Balboa looks toward the horizon and he sees La Mar del Sur, which again is the Pacific Ocean. There are some coincidences and contrasts when putting these two narratives together that are worth exploring. For instance, both of these Alephs, we could say, are in places of no easy access. On the one hand, the Aleph of the Darien is located in the top of a mountain amidst the jungle. On the other hand, the Aleph in Borges' story, although in a city, it is located in the darkest and lowest point of a house. While Balboa is closer to the sky, Borges is below ground level. In this way, the view from the Aleph of the Darien is one where Balboa can look down on the universe. Conversely, Borges has to look up. In Borges' story, I'm further interested in the Aleph as something that is kept out of sight from everyone else in the city. In the cellar, Borges disappears in the darkness and solitude, no one else being able to see him watching. Because one can only access the Aleph if having a key to the house, this also means that in accessing it, one can physically enclose oneself from the surroundings. Thus, the interaction with the world through the Aleph is primarily visual. So moving forward with the story, fully impressed with the view, Balboa quickly puts together a cross out of some tree barks on the ground. He holds it tightly and lifts it up in the air. Vertically, the cross mediates Balboa's relation to God, pointing at heaven and earth. Looking down on the territory, the crossed arms superimpose the isthmus with a rectilinear cut. The southern mountains in the Darien here are metaphorized as the point of maximum visibility in the universe. In the Spanish translation of this book, the title is rather different. It's called Stellar Moments of Humanity. The author is often quoted on how he envisioned these moments as stars shining new light on the fleeting and transient. on moments that brought attention to something that was not perceptible before. It could be argued that the author interpreted these moments as offering new perspectives from which to look at the world. Yet this new light had to be rapidly grabbed, for if not, the opportunity to experience the world anew could be easily missed. Contrasting this title, when Borges sees the universe through the Aleph, he actually thinks it means the end of his career as a writer. He thought that seeing the Aleph would never let him relate to the world imaginatively or creatively. The Aleph in Borges' story is understood as a kind of imprisonment of creativity, as it gave the illusion that the world could be fully known in a visual and distant format. Proving this differently, the world soon enough confronted Borges once again with surprise. So in the story the surprise is that the news that Argentino, his hideous friend, owner of the Aleph and a really bad writer, had won an important writing prize. Argentino, Borges thought, was finally no longer plotted by the Aleph. So the Aleph itself, the belief in the possibility of knowing everything through vision, was the plug cluttering Argentino's poetic engagement with the world. So perhaps the maximum point of visibility was rather the view that prevented perspectives from the trivialization of their own partiality, as a perspective which attempted to exhaust all other perspectives. So, getting to the end of this story, this discovery was in fact not enough to save him from a humiliating death. So following with the narrative of Ernesto Cardenal, which is a Nicaraguan poet, sometime after, another colonizer called Gil Gonzalez starts a journey to find the strait, connecting both oceans in the isthmus. Having started his expedition, a heavy storm comes. This storm lasts for days, transforming the land into a sea. After the storm, Gonzalez comes across an indigenous chief called Nicaragua. Nicaragua asks the colonizer if the Christians have heard anything about the deluge. Nicaragua asks if there was going to be another storm. Will the land be disturbed, or will the sky fall? Will the ground be turned upside down? So for me, Nicaragua was perhaps attempting to avert the colonial discourse pronounced upon the isthmus. Many storms were going to come after this one. With so much water falling from the sky, the highlands of the isthmus were going to be as is upside down forever after. Colonialism was going to move above this new smooth surface, ignoring that the land's accidents were still there. Below, inverted, concealed, I want to think, however, that the isthmus remains in some way or another. As the time has moved forward, all kinds of subjects have continued to move through the submerged waters of the Darien Isthmus, agitating the flat surface. In 2016, before elections in Nicaragua, a number of unusual photographs were found all over the streets of Nicaragua's frontier with Costa Rica. Taken in collaboration by artists Abacuc Vargas and Julia Murillo, these black and white photographs portrayed African migrants detained on the frontier wearing the emblematic hat of Nicaraguan revolutionary Augusto Cesar Sandino. These portraits sought to bring attention to the ignorance of the Nicaraguan government towards an increasing wave of immigration in the past recent years. Each and every one of these people, with the perseverant journeys through the Darien in search of a life lived with dignity, brings new life to the drained silhouettes of a revolution still to happen. For me, to say that the isthmus remain is then to consider Milton Santos' words, that besides, before, despite, after, and with a colonization of space and time, a space of all perseveres and presses. I imagine that the Darien could be the gap from where possibilities of another relationality, another history, another space calls out to the world, the break in the vis vertebrae, where the possibility of an outside, a revolution, a utopia, trouble the space of the few. Thank you very much.